Hello everyone, good afternoon, it's Jonathan Woods, just showing off a little bit of my new equipment. It's this rather snazzy piece of equipment called a gimbal, which can follow me around, which can be used in our videos when we do things for property as well, but also give a bit of a stable platform for me to talk to you guys. Now, just wanted to have a quick chat. I recently posted something about HMO licensing, a new directive coming in for the borough of Lambeth. Now, this is going to have quite a significant impact on my local area. It's something which I'm quite familiar with, being a portfolio landlord. I have a property over in Greenwich, which we bought with a business partner of mine a couple of years ago. And that became subject to what's called additional licensing. Now, for those of you who don't know what an HMO is, in a lot of big cities, especially London, a lot of accommodation is split up or is rented out to individuals. So family homes, rather than being rented out to a family, will have professional sharers living in them. Now, the friend groups from universities or from colleagues, from friends, will live in shared homes with communal spaces, but living as a group, not sort of individual locked rooms with maybe a shared kitchen and sort of ensuite bathrooms. That is your traditional 5 or 6 plus technical HMO or mandatory HMO. Now, there's what is called a house of multiple occupancy. Technically, is 3 or more people living together who are not of the same household. Now, household, the determination of that is a family unit. So obviously mother and father and children. It can also be brothers, sisters, cousins, but anyone who is living in a shared accommodation with 2 or more households is determined as being an HMO. Now, the government only requires you to have a license in the majority for what is called a mandatory HMO license, and that's for 5 people or more, and that's been in place for many years. And there are quite strict stipulations over certain things like fire regulations, specific room sizes, and it's something which is quite a specialist area of buy-to-let. You need to know what you're doing, you need to make sure that you're fully compliant, and it's something more of an advanced setup for people who've either spent a lot of time in buy-to-let investing or have had quite a lot of training or mentorship. Now, what is quite significantly heavy amount of investment has gone into from people buying buy-to-let is into shared accommodation, because of course the yields are higher. You can rent out the rooms. There's a lot of demand from the young professional sector, and one of the most traditional sort of elusive areas of that is 3 and 4 bedroom flats or houses that have been not split up, but just individual rooms, but not locked rooms, just shared together. Now, that in the majority across the whole of London came underneath the HMO licensing laws, and therefore you could rent it out, obviously compliantly, in the right way. You need to obviously follow the statutory requirements for gas safety, now quite recently electrical safety. But recently, across lots of different cities, councils have applied to the government to be able to require landlords to get licenses for properties that come underneath the mandatory HMO licensing laws. And there's 2 forms of that. One is called additional licensing, which requires anything of 3 people or more in a non-connected household sharing accommodation. So that would encompass all the 3 and 4 bedroom properties rented out not to families. You can take it even further than that and go towards something that's called selective licensing. And selective licensing is basically a full blanket licensing of every single property that is rented out. Some boroughs, such as from Hammersmith, have gone for certain roads to kind of protect certain roads from being bought up by investors and rented out. And some boroughs, such as say Newham or Croydon, have gone as far as requiring licenses for absolutely every property that is rented out. They've also even taken a step further and incorporating what's called an Article 4 directive, which also requires you to get planning permission to be able to rent out your home to 3 people or more. Now, the implications for that are quite significant. Technically, when you rent out sharers, you are changing its use from C4 residential to, 3 residential to C4 multiple occupancy. And in the majority, there is what's called permitted development that allows you to rent out without getting planning. If an Article 4 directive is brought in, you must get planning permission. And unfortunately, through my experiences when working I was covering the whole of London, my previous role before doing this, the Newham Council are refusing all planning permissions for HMO conversion. And their argument is that they're protecting their family stock. The problem is that we've got lots and lots of groups of people. I mean, I had at the time lots of doctors and nurses and students that all wanted to rent these lovely new build flats that had been bought and by investors and wanted to be rented out. But they're all sat there vacant because, to be honest, families don't really want to live in new build apartments. Some do, but a lot of them don't. So they're just sat there and they can't rent them out. And they're saying they're protecting their family stock, but actually they're alienating a large proportion of the rented population. So moving on, the requirements under additional licensing have just been brought into Lambeth. Now, Lambeth is a large borough in southwest London with a vast popularity within the young professional sector. For those of you who know this area, Clapham High Street, Clapham Common is the legendary Infernos club, and just a general lovely place for young professionals to live in. And over the 10, 20, 30 years of this area becoming more and more popular, lots of landlords, individual landlords, accidental landlords, people sort of providing for their own pensions, not big, fat, greedy fat cat in corporate investment landlords, just really general small-time investors have now come across the fact that they've got all this accommodation which now requires licensing. Now, some of you will say, well, that's great, it should bring up standards, and yes, it should. The slight problem, though, is that they bring in, one of the problems is, I think I'm all for safety, and fire safety, of course, is extremely important, so is electrical safety. I'm a responsible landlord, and I would hope that all of the landlords that rent out property are. Of course, there are some rogues around, just as much as there are rogue tenants. Now, but the main problem with all of this, in my opinion, is the minimum space requirements. Now, I can understand why the people may think it's a good idea to bring it in. So the minimum space requirement for a bedroom has been stipulated under HMO licensing for many years, and the minimum space requirement is 6.51 square metres. Lambeth have taken that further and actually extended that themselves to 7 square metres. Now, again, for those of you that may be watching or listening outside of London, you might think, goodness me, that's tiny. And yeah, a relatively small room, but for London requirements, certainly with the expense of renting in the whole of the capital, there is, I mean, I lived in a very small room when I first moved to London, and there are plenty of people who willingly will choose a small bedroom to save money. If you're a group of friends that are renting a 4-bedroom house, for example, with a small box room, the person that maybe is not earning as much as their friends would take that room. They're only going to sleep in it. They're not using it for anything else. Obviously, nowadays people are working from home a little bit more, but that room has value to someone. It's not in the way that it's portrayed in the media and possibly in the guise of the government or the councillors who implement this, that the poor tenant is being forced to live in substandard small accommodation. Maybe that is the case in some areas where there is, let's say it's not as an area such as Clapham. You might find that people are shoehorning numbers of people, I'm sure it happens in Clapham as well, but where you've got lots and lots of rooms being chopped in and putting 15, 16 people into a small bedroom flat. That, again, but a 4-bedroom house, Victorian house that has no modifications apart from an upgrade, that has a small bedroom in the back that someone has put a single bed into, that is more than happy to live in it, why should that now become determined uninhabitable, of which then the owner of the landlord must now turf that tenant out onto the street, and that property now loses its value from a point of view of rented accommodation. It may not even meet the mortgage requirements, and therefore that landlord is then going to have to sell that. Now, some people might turn around and say, great, that's brilliant, it's gone onto the sales market. But what about the poor tenants? 65% of the population in London rent, roughly. And if we start taking away more and more of that stock, what are we going to see? We're going to see prices rise, which is already happening. Houses of multiple occupancy, sharing accommodation is in the highest demand and the shortest supply. The entry point for purchasing is so high versus obviously the rentals that you need to cover for it from the mortgage. no one's buying them from buy to let, and they're becoming more and more scarce, and therefore prices are going up and up and up. So really, they really need to rethink this, but it's not going to change. It's going to go in for the next 5 years. All I would urge is, if you're a property owner in Lambeth and you have accommodation which is 3 bedrooms, well, not even bedrooms, if you've got 3 tenants or more, you need to start thinking about this. It's coming in December the 6th. If you need any more information, please do give me a call. You can find my details obviously on the website, it's jonathanwoods.exp.uk.com. Hope this has been interesting, and first of many to come. A little bit more info later in the week. Thanks.